Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. You know, it's really good to see you.
Inside or outside?
It's a glorious morning, and we have an exciting program, I think, that we're all going to benefit from today. But before we begin, there are certainly some people to recognize and to thank. Mr. Ed Pascarella. Mr. Pascarella is a very important player here. You don't see him all the time, but he is behind the scenes providing us with the resources that enable us to have these kinds of events and work with this group of folks. Michael Connolly. Where's Mr. Souza?
Morning,
Souza, there he is, way in the back. Two of our fine public school educators. Mr. Koska can't be with us today, Mr. Connolly?
Yes, he's out of town.
He's out of town. Well, Mr. Koska is also important because he is he leads the PA Academy at Shea High School, and he was the Civic Educator of the Year last year. So he's a very important person to these kinds of programs. Dr. Reinhardt of our faculty, Dr. Proman of our faculty is also here. Dr. Proman, there you are in the back. And of course, we have some very special guests joining us today from Bowie State University, all the way from Maryland, Dr. Archie Morris. Dr. Morris was with us last year and had such a great time, he demanded to come back. And we also have Dr. Stephen Conrad, who is president of the American Society for Public Administration. So we're very pleased to have you gentlemen with us, and thank you for your participation. We also have the Hayes family, Mr. Hayes the elder and Mr. Hayes the younger. We will have a presentation on the environment and the ethics later this afternoon from the younger Mr. Hayes. So thank you gentlemen for coming. Now, certainly people who work with me during the year as part of ASPA, and the ASPA Council, Susan Monahan and Steve Adamic and several others, Sarah Robertson. And so these folks are instrumental in getting us all here together for this kind of event. Perhaps the most important person to all of this is Jane Flora. Without Mrs. Flora, I'm probably not standing here. Mrs. Flora has been just an absolute wonder. She is always there to support the students. She also is there to support me, and without her, we wouldn't be doing any of this. And today is Mrs. Flora's birthday. So happy birthday. When asked how old she would be at dinner last night, she said, hardly enough. Now, our program today is the culminating event for a year-long series. And I've come to really enjoy this time of year, particularly because of this event. As most of us know, at the end of the academic year in May and June, we celebrate success of school students, graduate students, undergraduate students. And I always find that to be a happy time. And so what we do here in the 4th annual Public Service Week celebration is, in fact, celebrating the success of the Rhode Island chapter of the American Society for Public Administration, the national offices of ASPA, and certainly everything that you folks have done to learn and improve and get better and make a difference in many, many ways. And even if you are still in school, that's public service. Trust me, the taxpayers are appreciative of your work when you bring home aids. And when you bring home aids, if you do, I'd like you to write a little note to my son, who is 17 and needs encouragement. So anything you can do to help me would help him. This year, we have been talking about, throughout the series of events, ethics in the community and the state of public service. And today's keynote address speaker is, I believe, exceptionally qualified for talking to us about those kinds of issues. As many of you know, during the fall, I return to Texas and go to Oklahoma for celebration on football weekends. And I have come to look forward to finding the keynote speaker in print in the Dallas Morning News. Now that's quite an amazing thing when you consider that the Dallas Morning News is, how shall we say, conservative. I first encountered her on a Monday morning at the DFW airport when I picked up the Dallas Morning News, as is my custom, to read on the plane returning home. And I do look at the editorials in the Dallas Morning News, which are generally either very local or extremely conservative. So when I saw the byline, first of all, I thought, this is not a person who looks familiar to the editorial board of the newspaper that I'm used to reading. And then I started reading her columns, and I was struck by the insight that I was finding in those columns amid the pages of the Dallas Morning News. Imagine my great surprise when I was able to come to Rhode Island and read the Providence Journal, in which her articles also appear. And I look forward to each Wednesday morning at the butcher shop on the east side of Providence, settling down with my second cup of coffee and reading from Harrop's Wednesday columns. Ms. Harrop writes across a broad spectrum of issues having to do with public policy. I've even used her columns in my courses. I hope you don't mind, Ms. Harrop.
Please.
I do give you credit.
That's all I want.
There's a citation. And I put that under the heading, as many of you know who take my clerical courses, called Our Course in the News. Ripped from today's headlines, that's correct, Mr. Desolate. So rather than continue to read, I thought, let's have Ms. Harp speak to us directly. And so it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you Providence's own from Harp.
Hey, good morning. It's a beautiful morning in Rhode Island. It makes up for the other stuff being winter and ethics, which will be the subject of today's talk. So, if you want to talk about ethics, let's start at the baddest of the bad days, the Gilded Age. Let's start in 1906. In 1906, a red-hot series of exposés appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine. Cosmopolitan at that time was a sober journal of current affairs. There was none of that 20 ways to please your man stuff. In the series, David Graham Phillips accused powerful senators of crimes against the people. He accused the Senate leaders of having sold out the country to Gilded Age industrialists for a bag of money. In the series, he let loose. He totally let loose. He named it treason of the Senate, so you can imagine what was in it. But I'll give you some excerpts. Of New York Senator Chauncey Depew, Phillips wrote, he represented interests whose growth and power can only mean the degradation of the people, of the uneducated into sycophants, of the masses towards serfdom. I'd be fired if I wrote that stuff. Depew was a sly courier agent with the greasy conscience and the greasy tongue and the greasy backbone and the greasy hinges of the knees. He didn't miss out on many body parts there. Rhode Island's own Senator Nelson Aldrich was the right arm of treason. And I hear there are some Marylanders here. Maryland Senator Arthur Pugh Gorman was the left arm of the monster. So you can see that Phillips was kind of balanced in a certain way. He even took down the patrician senator from Massachusetts, Henry Cabot Lodge. He said Lodge was, quote, inwardly the familiar coarse type of machine politician disguised by the robes of the gentleman scholar. When he read this, President Theodore Roosevelt hit the roof. And as you would expect from Theodore Roosevelt, he gave a rousing speech. In 1906, April, at a ceremony laying the cornerstone of the House of Representatives' new office building, T.R. bellowed, and I'm going to try to do my T.R. imitation. I ask forgiveness in advance. Hysterical sensationalism is a very porous weapon wherewith to fight for everlasting righteousness. The liar is no whit better than the thief, and if his mendacity takes the form of slander, he may be worse than most thieves. It puts a premium upon knavery, untruthfully to attack an honest man, or even with hysterical exaggeration to assail a bad man with untruth. He likened the sensationalistic journalists to a figure in John Bunyan's religious allegory, Pilgrim's Progress. In Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, T.R. said, "You may recall the description of the man with the muckrake, the man who could look no way but downward with a muckrake in his hand, who was offered a celestial crown for his muckrake, but who would look neither up nor regard the crown he was offered, but continued to rake to himself the filth on the floor." Thus, the term muckraker was coined to refer to a certain brand of journalism in the first decade of the 20th century, very, very hot-tempered, and for good reasons, and sometimes intemperate exposés on corruption in American government. And also, some of them wrote about corruption in labor unions. No leaf was left unturned. But I think I have to mention here that T.R. completely misrepresented Bunyan's allegory. To Bunyan, the muck was not corruption, but actually worldly goods. And the man with the muckrake was the rich man only interested in treasure and not with spiritual matters. So there is a certain irony here of the muckrakers. The journalists were actually going after the man with the muckrake, according to Bunyan's view of the world. And T.R. completely messed that up, and he may have known, and if he did, he didn't care. But you may ask yourself, why did Roosevelt get so hot? After all, he was a reformer himself. Upton Sinclair, another muckraker, another journalist, said that he'd heard worse things about the senators from T.R. himself around Roosevelt's own dining room table. Sinclair recalled T.R. privately referring to Eugene Hale, a senator from Maine, as, quote, the senator from the shipbuilding trust, and in language as intemperate as anything in the Phillips series, T.R. called Hale, quote, the most innately and essentially malevolent scoundrel that God Almighty ever put on earth. What did he really think? Sinclair said that Phillips, in his wildest moment, never approached Roosevelt for sheer invective. Well, I have some reasons why I think Roosevelt went after the Phillips series. For starters, he was kind of the blogger-in-chief of the pre-digital age. He read widely, and there was absolutely nothing he would not comment on. You know Jack London, the writer of White Fang? He took Jack London to task over London's portrayal of the fight between the wolf and the bulldog. He said that London was a, quote, nature faker. And he said that the portrayal of that sight scene was, and this is hard to get past anyone's tongue, the very sublimity of absurdity. Another reason is that T.R. had an ego the size of a hydroelectric plant. He had to be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and I think the leader of every parade for reform. He was also, at that time, in the titanic struggle with another dominating personality, that of William Randolph Hearst, the publisher of many newspapers, the father of what we call yellow journalism. Hearst papers at that time were agitating for the direct election of senators. And perhaps equally as important, Hearst himself was a member of Congress, and he came from the opposing party, the Democrats, and he was a supporter of William Jennings Bryan, who was one of Roosevelt's political opponents. Okay, Phillips had offered voluminous details documenting the unholy ties between the likes of Vanderbilt and various senators. Were his facts wrong? No, they were mostly right, and TR was wrong to say they weren't. But I think in Roosevelt's view, Phillips committed a worse crime than getting facts wrong. He got the politics wrong. Phillips didn't understand things like homely compromise. He didn't cotton to lawmakers having to play the cards they're dealt, even when the hand is pretty ugly. He didn't understand the importance of the old quid pro quo, whereby, you do a little horse trading to get someone's vote for an important piece of legislation. And Phillips didn't recognize that politicians were also ordinary men. In fact, after Roosevelt read the series, one of his first remarks was, "Poor Chauncey." Now, most of you have seen the movie Lincoln. Remember that famous smoke-filled room scene where Lincoln's henchmen are, under orders from the president, are going out to do anything they can in their abilities to get enough votes to pass the 13th Amendment, which would abolish slavery. And they did everything. You saw them passing bags of cash to legislators. They agreed to spend money on a bridge to nowhere in Ohio. They handed out jobs. They even threatened some of the representatives' re-election. In the end, Lincoln got enough votes to pass the 13th Amendment. Lincoln was a hero, right? But these transactions would have run afoul of the Rhode Island Ethics Commission's Code of Ethics, or any other state's Code of Ethics. Here are Rhode Island's. As Jason Granite, Rhode Island's Ethics Commission staff attorney, said here in a presentation not long ago, he said Rhode Island has the strongest ethics commission in the country. These codes contain strict rules barring public officials and employees from taking even free meals under many circumstances. Looking at Rhode Island's politics, the nature of them, you wouldn't think we had much of an ethics code at all, but we do have one. So, how would Lincoln's campaign to pass the 13th Amendment fit into this code? Not well. The highest bar in Rhode Island's ethical guidelines, Granite said, is avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. How does delivering sacks of greenbacks look to you? Okay, some political analysts who watched the movie saw Lincoln's deal-making as deal-making justified by the cause, and that it was a model for voters to understand, that politics isn't always pretty. George Shelton of the LA Times wrote, "Every voter should see it," the movie, "at least those idealists who cling to the misguided notion that politicians must be pure and not truly representative of the people who elect them, that they should be angelic, not human." But some people didn't like the movie's message at all. Wendy Murphy, a professor over at New England Law School, had been railing against allegations in the Massachusetts probation department of jobs being sold for votes. She wrote in the Boston Herald's blog, "Spare me the ends justify the means argument, because tolerance for any corruption legitimizes all corruption. It doesn't matter that the times are different now, because corruption in the 1880s was no more acceptable than it is today. If the quid pro quo stuff that allegedly went on at the Massachusetts Probation Department is the measuring stick, Lincoln should have been impeached. Cornhusker kickback, anyone? Do you remember how foes of the Affordable Care Act went ballistic when the Obama administration offered Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska $100 million for his Medicaid program, obviously in return for his vote for Obamacare? No other state was offered that money. He got the vote. Now yours truly, me, I was an ardent supporter of the Affordable Care Act, and I felt it was one of the overarching moral issues of our day. But the Cornhusker kickback made me sick. Did I run to my keyboard and say, do not do this? Passing on a bag of money to Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska is not worth passing the Affordable Care Act. I did not. What I did was make a little mental note to myself that 8 years from now, when Obamacare is a law of the land and no one's arguing about it anymore, I'll say, gee, that was kind of an ugly thing to do. Now, I am not in any way belittling the importance of ethics codes. We need rules. Ethics commissions draw lines. Those lines are important. But in the practical conduct of politics, of governing, lines must sometimes be drawn on the lines. And drawing lines on those lines require judgment. Okay, school has a no tolerance policy on drugs. A girl is caught with Midol in her handbag. In the homeroom, she has menstrual cramps. Do you rip her out of her seat and send her to the principal's office? I say that's crazy, but it's happened. Okay, you're on a two-lane highway. The speed limit is 65. Someone ahead of you is crawling at 40. You're going to pass that guy, and you're going to go 75, because the faster you pass that guy, the safer everyone is going to be. So you're going 75. You're breaking the speed limit. Are you doing wrong? I don't think so. I think you're actually being safer than the guy crawling along at 40. Circling back to the treason of the Senate, we can see that David Graham Phillips' intemperate buckshot approach did not advance the cause of reform as much as it could have. He left no room for the lawmaker going 75 in the 65-mile zone. And I think that's subtracted from the series power. Another muckraker, Lincoln Steffens, was far less naive about politics. He wrote a series in 1905 called Struggle for Self-Government. It was also very angry, but Steffens seemed more sophisticated about political sausage making. Writing about the great reformer, Robert La Follette, Steffens said, they say in Wisconsin that La Follette is an opportunist. They say true. But so is Folk. Joseph Folk was a reformer who cleaned up politics in Missouri. And so are the Chicago reformers as to specific issues. And what Steffens was saying was that the regular politicians, by which he meant the backroom guys, would latch onto certain issues that were popular because that would get them reelected, but their main mission in the legislature was to advance the causes of the special interests that paid them off, allowing them to buy furs and diamonds for themselves. But Steffens goes on to explain the difference between the backroom guys and a La Follette. He said the regulars wanted only to keep in power so as to continue the profitable business of representing the railroads and other special interests. La Follette really wanted certain abuses corrected, and La Follette was, and is, for any sound issue that will arouse the people of Wisconsin to restore representative government. As an aside, this series also included the infamous article, Rhode Island, a Corrupted People. Stephan said, Rhode Island is grounded on the lowest layer of corruption that I have found thus far, the bribery of voters. With cash at the polls. So never mind a code of ethics for the lawmakers. Stephan's wanted a code of ethics for the voters. I think that's a good idea. I'm going to do a column on that sometime. But I digress. Okay, what about people like me? What about journalists who judge others? Let me speak from personal experience. In the winter of 2011, I was sitting at my desk minding my own business when I got a call from the president of the National Conference of Editorial Writers. This is a professional organization of which I was vice president at the time. The fellow says to me, hey, Froma, are you sitting down? I just accepted a job. I'm leaving the business. I'm no longer an editorial page editor. I have to resign as president. You're now president. Have a nice life. That summer was the summer of the crisis over raising the debt ceiling. Again, I saw a moral issue. I felt that the Tea Party people were threatening the full faith and credit of the United States government. And that is a very serious thing to threaten. Now, I suspected at the time that a lot of the Tea Party people didn't know what they were doing. They didn't understand the gravity of holding up what is usually a routine vote to raise the debt ceiling. I was a little more disappointed. I was a lot more disappointed with the Republican leadership, which knew better but was unable to keep this faction in check. Anyway, the crisis was averted, but in the meantime, stocks went crazy. America's credit rating was lowered, and an economy that was already weak was weakened further. I was really boiling mad. I had the word treason rolling around my head, but I didn't use it. Instead, I wrote a column calling the Tea Partiers, quote, economic terrorists. So did Joe Nocera at the New York Times, and Margaret Carlson, and Tom Friedman at the Times made a similar reference. Nocera apologized. I did not. My argument, I wrote an argument that went as follows. If a guy with a long beard and a long white robe was sitting in a cave in Afghanistan and said, I have the means to destroy the American economy and I will use them if my demands aren't met, would we call that person an economic terrorist? I say yes. If some, self-styled American patriots wearing three-cornered hats say essentially the same thing, somehow it's a radical, uncivil thing to call them economic terrorists. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal, which is a conservative publication, was also upset. They used a slightly less emotional term, calling the Tea Party people hobbits. And that got, the Tea Party people said, well, hobbits are good people. But anyway, that got Wall Street Journal editorial page in a little bit of hot water with people who normally support them. And so I think the Wall Street Journal decided to deflect the anger elsewhere. Elsewhere turned out to be me. James Toronto, Wall Street Journal blogger, posted no fewer than 7 posts calling me all kinds of things. He called me a hypocrite and ugly besides. And blogs all over the right-wing blogosphere started calling me hypocrite and ugly besides, and I guarantee you that 1% of those people actually read the article. And that's, part of being, in the media today. I think another reason Toronto went after me is that I was liberal, I was female, and this made his job easier. I was president of the National Conference of Editorial Writers, which was running a project called the Civility Project. Now, that fateful day when I was told you're now president, I barely knew what the Civility Project was. It was a few guys, bantering over email about our doing something to help improve the nature of political arguments in this country. The Civility Project was never aimed at improving people's manners or not hurting anyone's feelings. Being intellectuals, we were using the word civility in its original sense, that pertaining to good citizenship. Bad idea. We're innocent, I tell you, we're innocent. All we wanted to do was help ourselves and the public make strong arguments. We were pretty naive in using the word civility because so many people read Civility Project to mean, making people nicer to one another. We eventually changed the name of the project to Civiltas. It was also useless for me to note that I was the head of an organization whose members come from the political left, right, and sideways. Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal, is a member of NCEW, which has since changed its name to Association of Opinion Journalists. So this was no left-wing conspiracy. Anyhow, next thing I know, I'm on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart being ribbed. Now I'm going to go Nixonian on you for a minute. My enemies said that I was made a fool of, that my hypocrisy was exposed. My friends said I did a great job. I was a good sport in what was, at bottom, a comedy skit. Anyhow, my appearance on The Daily Show went viral, and I spent an entire month of my one and only life trying to explain myself. And why did I have to explain myself? Well, partly because I'm sure probably more of you watch The Daily Show than read a newspaper, and I don't know how many of you read my column, probably not many. The good old days of the mainstream media are gone. Back then, you were written about, even if you didn't like what they were writing, trained journalists. And if you had a complaint, you had someone to call, you had an editor to call. Mainstream media was not then, and is not now, any paradise of truth and honesty. But there were some breaks on perverse journalistic behavior. There is none of that in the new media, as I'm sure all of you know. What I face and what you as future policymakers and government officials will face is an environment in which every genius, fool, and big mouth can self-publish. And much of the reading public cannot distinguish among them for quality of thought or loyalty to facts. And even professional journalists today, lack the resources and time to do the sort of job they used to do. I'm fortunate to remain a member of the mainstream media, which is another way of saying the paid media. And so I'll keep my thoughts on civility and Civiltas limited to them. Journalists, that is professional journalists, we do have our own code of ethics. There are rules. Among them, thou shalt use logic. Thou shalt not misrepresent the opposition's view. Thou shalt not knowingly pass on an untruth. Note that none of these rules preclude satire, ridicule, or biting commentary. Thus, it can be hard to explain this to a public that sometimes confuses ethics with civility. They're not the same thing. H.L. Mencken, during the 1920s, wrote a famous column in which he called William Jennings Bryan, a populist who ran for president 3 times, quote, a walking fever. Bryan Mencken wrote, was a charlatan, a zany without sense or dignity. And the people who followed him were a forlorn mob of imbeciles. H.L. Mencken published this column the day after Bryan died. Was it unethical? No. Was it mean? For certain. In later years, Mencken expressed some regret for having written that column the way he did, for being too mean. He never apologized. Apologizing was not Mencken's style. He took no prisoners. But even he felt he may have gone a little overboard this time. As for ethics in government, these lines are hard to draw because, as I've already mentioned, you're trying to get something done in a system overrun by human beings. But you do need some rules of the road, hence the Rhode Island Code of Ethics, a very long document. So, when those in government stretch or break the rules, we have to answer the question, was it worth it? In Lincoln's case, passing the 13th Amendment, I would say yes, and so would most historians. For journalists, the question is similar. But as for the matter of civility, or its opposite, the question when judging something you or someone else has written is, was the argument effective? Let's look again at David Graham Phillips and his Treason of the Senate series. Theodore Roosevelt said that it made the cause of reform more difficult, and so did many other journalists. Phillips was devastated by the response, and he went back to writing novels. In 1911, Phillips was about to enter the Princeton Club in New York City when a deranged man showed up and shot him 6 times. The gunman was a member of a prominent Washington family who had imagined that Phillips had maligned his sister in one of his novels. Phillips died a few days later. Okay, let's look at the Treason of the series. Was it effective? Well, historians looking back say it did succeed in opening a more honest discussion of the legislative body that many journalists at the time, Muckrakers included, was being highly critical of. Some 20 of Phillips' targets resigned from the Senate or died in the 7 years leading to the adoption of the 17th Amendment. And what did the 17th Amendment do? It established the popular election of U.S. senators. Perhaps Phillips had advanced the cause of reform after all. Hey guys, follow me on Twitter, @FromAHarrop. I can see you're all writing that down, thank you. I'll take questions, and also at some point I'd like to mention your role in our civic culture.
Questions for Ms. Harp? Because if you don't, I won't. Ms. Harp, we began the series of ethics discussions, which you were concluding for us today, I think, in fine fashion. By the way, you'll note that Ms. Harp makes lots of references to history. And for those of you who've been my students, you know that I adore history. We began our discussions with a minister and an atheist. But both of them, correct me for those of you who were there, correct me if I'm wrong, both of them said that the guiding principle for ethics is do the right thing. Now, I don't know how many pages you're holding in your hand, but it's quite voluminous. Is there anything in there that can be interpreted as doing the right thing so that it's absolutely and totally clear?
There's a lot in here about doing the right thing. Whether it's totally clear is is in the eyes of the beholder. You know, half of this is defining what the Ethics Commission does, and making definitions of who is who they're covering, and who is making the judgments. History is really important, and I had that very same thought. I'm obviously very interested in the Muckraker era, but I was reading today's Times about millennials, about so many millennials saying they're disillusioned with politics. Many of them had supported Obama with all their heart and soul, and now everything Obama had promised them, not everything is being done. And politics is still nasty, and he hasn't transformed the American political scene. And let me tell you, what's going on now in Washington is bad, but not as bad as what's gone on in our history. And so you guys have to get over yourselves. You've got to stop thinking, what's he doing for me? You have to understand that if you participate in this democracy of ours, you can move reform forward. You have to push Obama and also help Obama. And one of Obama's techniques, by the way, which differs from some of his predecessors, is he goes straight to the public. He's trying, when he has an issue to push, some piece of legislature, his tendency is to go to social media, go to you guys. Go to the people who supported him and tell them, hey, contact your legislator. Because the vested interests, I guarantee you, are all over the legislators. They have to know that you're out there, and you've got to be out there.
Right after we had Mr. Grant speak to us in March,
right,
in which he made that very direct assertion, to which I raised an eyebrow. And I believe our own Christine Smith posted on one of our discussions.
Where's Christine?
Christine? I believe it was Ms. Smith, correct me if I'm wrong, but someone in the public policy course took it upon him or herself, and I believe it was Ms. Smith, who went to a website that ranks the integrity of states. Wasn't that you, Ms. Smith? And what did you find there?
Rhode Island was not in the top 10.
It was not in the top 10.
No.
Was it in the top 20?
I think it was in the top 20.
Okay, so ranking 20 out of 50, that's sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
So,
We ranked in the middle. Well, that's interesting because I would think we ranked lower. I think there's something a little close and incestuous about Rhode Island politics. So my guess is that we think it's a little worse than it is, but there's huge room for improvement. We're now having a tussle in the state legislature about allowing the Rhode Island Ethics Commission to also cover lawmakers. I think that's essential. That's really essential to having any kind of ethical code. So lawmakers are saying, no, you can go after a policymaker in the department of this or that, but you can't go after me. You guys have to raise your voices. You have to be informed. I hope you do it for all our sakes.
well, you're talking to the heirs of the progressive movement right here. Am I right, Dr. Condren? It was the progressive movement that led to the formation of what we call today public administration, and what they had in mind is public service. And I hope after our break, I hope you're able to stay with us for a couple of presentations, I think, that sort of show the way in that regard, and show you what our young folks can really do and how they think. I think if you are going to talk about ethics and public service in Rhode Island in particular, these folks know have something to say. Now, as is our custom, when we have guests that join us for presentations of this kind, we always present them with a token of our appreciation. And since you're not a government official, I'm assuming there's no ethics violation. This is a And we also support Rhode Island businesses, so this is an item that was made in Rhode Island, with Rhode Island materials, by Rhode Island people. So we thank you for your time and your talk, and we look forward to being able to interact with you so briefly, at least on Friday.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Well, I believe we have some beverages and other items for the break, so we'll be back in approximately 15 minutes or so, and there will be, I believe, an exciting presentation.